A long-awaited exchange of prisoners between Russia and Ukraine has taken place. The swap could be a significant step towards easing relations between the countries and raising chances of resolving the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Now, fighting there between troops and Russian-backed separatists has killed more than 13,000 people since 2014. 35 Ukrainians, including filmmaker Oleg Sentsov, and 24 sailors detained since last year in Russia were transferred from Moscow to Kiev, with 35 Russians heading in the opposite direction. And for more on this story, we're joined by our correspondent Nick Connolly in Moscow and Kiev Post editor Matthew Kupfer in the Ukrainian capital. Welcome to you both. Matthew, starting with you, bring us up to date with the latest. What is happening right now in Kiev?
Well, the prisoner exchange has already happened here. It was a very emotional scene at Kiev Borispol Airport when the plane arrived. The former prisoners now exited the plane. They embraced President Volodymyr Zelensky, met their relatives, embraced their relatives. A lot of emotions, a very happy scene. They are now likely being taken to an elite medical clinic for medical checks. But on this end, the exchange has happened. Some of the people returned include, as mentioned, film director Oleg Sentsov, a very prominent political prisoner, but also 24 Ukrainian sailors who were captured while crossing from the Black Sea into the Azov Sea in November. Roman Sushenko, a journalist who was arrested while visiting family in Moscow. Also, Pavlo Grib, a Ukrainian who was 19 in 2017 when he was basically kidnapped and illegally extradited to Moscow from Belarus. So it's a very big emotional day for Ukraine.
And Nick, how is this exchange of prisoners being perceived on the Russian side?
Well, Helena, there's a bit of sort of asymmetrical side to this because not many of the people heading the other way, coming to Moscow, are as well known in Russia as is the case for those now travelling or returned to Kiev. The only really household name here, Kirill Vyshinsky, a journalist who worked and headed the Kiev office of a Russian news agency. Apart from that, not many people known to the wider Russian public, and indeed most of them are actually Ukrainian citizens who were in Ukrainian jails for fighting or assisting the separatists. I think this is less important for the Russian domestic audience than for Russia's image abroad. We saw President Putin meeting Emmanuel Macron of France in the last month, and this is all part of steps to kind of show that Russia is acting in good faith and willing to de-escalate and try and find some kind of start to a new resolution of the peace process.
Well, talking about household names then, Matthew, of course, film director Oleg Sentsov was among the prisoners exchanged. What does his release mean today?
Well, it's a very significant moment for Ukraine because he is, of course, highly publicly known. It's a significant victory for President Zelensky. But at the same time, Sentsov is a figure who is so dominant in narratives of political prisoners that sometimes it can actually suck the oxygen out of the room for other political prisoners. There are still, after this, possibly up to somewhere around 200 Ukrainian political prisoners of different types held in Russia. And as Sentsov himself said to journalists after he arrived, the fight is not over. They need to free the others. So his return is a big moment for Ukraine, but it could also mean less attention to political prisoners, actually.
All right, back to you then, Nick, because you mentioned some asymmetry in how this swap is being perceived. So what then is the significance of a swap like this between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, President Zelensky definitely very upbeat there, selling this as the start of big changes ahead and a path to peace. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
We have done two connections, telephone connections between two presidents, and we have done the first step. We have to begin all the steps publicly. All the steps in Minsk process, in Normandy. I hope that I just forgot to say about it to our journalists. I hope we'll have the nearest meeting in Normandy format, and we'll speak about it, and we'll speak all the steps during not the future, during the nearest future. We have to do all the steps to finish this horrible war.
So finishing this horrible war, as President Zelensky says, I think that is optimism that we haven't seen for a long time. This is a peace process that has been stuck for years and hasn't been going anywhere. But I think this is low-hanging fruit, as it were. This was something that was relatively easy to do, relatively small compromises having to be made on both sides. The next steps will be much more painful. This will be the bigger issues of providing some kind of autonomy to these eastern Ukrainian regions if they're returned to Kiev's control, and also what to do with all the people who served the separatist forces, some kind of amnesty. What is Russia willing to give? What is Ukraine willing to give? Much less room for manoeuvre there, and very tough negotiations ahead.
The assessment there of Nick Connolly in Moscow and Matthew Kupfer in Kiev. Thank you to you both.